Hello, and welcome to our next edition of Kanban for Everyone. I'm Colleen Johnson. I'm the CEO of ProKanban.org. I'm an Agile coach with Agile Velocity, and I'm the co-founder of Scatterspoke. We have a really exciting episode for everyone today and a real powerhouse of guests here joining me. I would love to introduce you to Steve Bell, founder of Lean for NGO and author of Lean NGO, and Marcus Hammarberg. Marcus has done a lot of work in the Kanban space, including other Kanban books, not related to NGO, but also we'll be sharing more about his story today. And Marcus, forgive me if I butcher the name, the pronunciation here. Is it Bungsu?
Yeah. Okay, I thought you meant my name. That was spot on. And Bangsu is quite all right. Bungsu in Indonesian, but hey, who's counting?
Yes, so we'll be learning more about Salvation, the story of how Lean saved a hospital in Indonesia, not once, but twice. So Marcus will be sharing more about that story with us today as well. So why don't you both introduce yourselves to the audience if they're unfamiliar with you and your work and a little bit about your background. Marcus, you want to go first?
I'd love to. So my name is Marcus Hammarberg, and right now I work as a teacher or a head of curriculum. I'm teaching software development to people that wants to learn that really fast. I'm even in my gear here to do all commercial I can, but that's not really my background. I used to be a software developer and got really interested in agile, which led me down the path to investigating Lean through Kanban, actually. So Kanban is like my home turf, and I have had so much great use of that in many different scenarios. And one of the most different ones that we're going to talk about later on today. That will be more about that. But I'm a software guy from the outset, and now I'm barely software, more process, I would say.
Great. And where are you joining us from, Marcus?
I'm from in Stockholm, so I'm situated in one of the small islands right in the middle of Stockholm, actually. So we have autumn coming on here, but it's not too bad yet.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us. I know it's later for you today. And Steve Bell, I met you a long time ago at the Lean Systems Society meetings. We were reminiscing about some of, I think one of the first ones, Boulder was flooding all around us when we were trying to brainstorm and talk about Lean. So Steve, will you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Colleen. I've been at this world of continuous improvement and innovation around technology for about 35 years, and I've seen an awful lot come and go. I've had the privilege of seeing both the birth and evolution of Lean practice and the Agile practice side by side over the last several decades. And it's led me to some pretty profound realizations. It's led in the commercial side of my coaching practice to a good bit of success. But what's been really exciting for me is bringing this same knowledge, these same skills, the thinking process, to the world of nonprofits and NGOs, because this world now more than ever needs what NGOs have to offer, but NGOs need to become operationally excellent and able to pivot and innovate under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And so from the very start of my career, although I started in technology, I'm not an engineer like Marcus is. I've always focused on trying to convince people technology is not the solution. The solution has to start with people understanding their process, owning their outcomes, and then they can make judicious application of technology. But most importantly, they can sustain their work and their processes going forward, making the most of them as conditions change. And that's why I like Kanban so much, because Kanban is clearly the most present example of something that is so simple, but it can take an individual or a team so far. So thank you for having this session.
Yeah, that's awesome, Stephen. I feel like you set up a few things there that I'd love to kick off with here. You know, I don't know how many of our audience members are in the nonprofit world, but I'd love to talk a little bit about the common problems that nonprofits face. So for those of us that aren't, familiar with what an NGO might be faced with, I mean, I'm sure doing more with less is critical here because finances are probably limited, staff is probably limited. But Marcus, do you want to kick off by offering us some of the common problems you've seen?
Yeah, so my entry to this field, I think Steve knows much more about this, but I'm a member of the Salvation Army. So I actually worked for them in several places, but the story that we're talking about, I'm going to talk about here today, is when I worked for them in Indonesia. And you're hitting the nail on the head, I think, there with that. I mean, resources are very often limited, but what is interesting with the NGOs that I've been involved in, at least, is that the goal is very well known. So it's not like you can get it hidden by a budget or something like that. It's often like, we're here to do this. Everyone knows that in a much clearer fashion, I think. And then another thing, before I let Steve fill out everything that I forgot, but another thing that I really realized is that there's a lot of volunteers working there. So you will have to be a leader for people that you can't really tell what to do, because they are there voluntary. You can't decide, right? So you need to lead in a very different way. But turns out it's a good way to lead, even in a profit-making organization as well. So that's a couple of things that I reflected over when I was involved in doing NGO work. So,
And do you
but
find
Steve, I forgot some basic stuff, I presume.
Oh, we could talk on this question for the whole hour, which is not our intention, but I'll try to add a perspective. Again, anchoring this on the perspective of Kanban, which derives from both lean and agile practice. Lean mostly focusing on operational excellence, and agile focusing more on development and innovation in conditions of uncertainty. But then the two have to get together very closely, because you can't develop something, it doesn't add value if you cannot effectively release it. And so, Colleen, when we first spoke, you said, well, what do these things do for NGOs, nonprofits around the world? Well, nonprofits do any kind of work you can imagine. They deliver food, they deliver medical supplies, they deliver people, they provide education, women's rights. Just go down the UN goals, the 20-year goals, and there is a list of things. And there are NGOs on this planet, big ones and small ones, everything from the World Bank all the way down to a local mom and pop nonprofit, to Bill Gates and his foundation and others. And so it's any kind of work. The question is, how do they do it more effectively, more quickly, and in conditions of uncertainty? And that's the challenge here. Because the things that we're facing now, we've just heard Gates in the last few months come out and say, we've slipped on all the UN development goals in the last 2 years. The pandemic and the economic situation has put us behind. And you can't solve any one of these problems. You can't solve hunger without solving healthcare. You can't solve education without solving women's rights. You can't solve any of these independently. So the big challenge in our future, and when I see these things so relevant, is the only way we're going to solve these big problems, and we need to solve these in a hurry, is collaboration. Multiple organizations need to come together, NGOs, governments, commercial enterprises, focused on outcomes in some very tangled situations, in some very difficult issues, where there are few simple problems. Most of them are very complex, and a lot of them are chaotic. And so we need to come up with ways to bring multiple stakeholders together, to clearly see the vision, understand the work to be done, the problems in our way, to help clarify so everyone marches off and makes their contribution. And again, I bring that back to Kanban. Kanban is a very simple example of the kind of thinking and tools that the Lean and Agile community can bring to the table to help enable these collaborative communities to work effectively together.
Yeah, I heard a little systems thinking in there, I think, too, Steve,
yes.
just thinking about all those things being connected. I was
Yes.
hearing you say that was reminding me of the Donatella Matthews book. I think she talks a little bit about all of those things being so tightly connected at the beginning. Well, let's talk a little bit about where you started, right? So I think you both have really incredible stories to share. Steve, will you share a little bit about the first project where you saw this opportunity to bring Kanban into a nonprofit, and where you began?
Well, that's a good question. I had been on the Lean journey, and well, for probably about 7 or 8 years. When my wife, her generous soul, she sent me to Guatemala on a couple of Habitat for Humanity builds. And that, even there, just the simple mechanics of lean engineering in the field at 10,000 feet at 90 degrees, building a mud home, they came in very handy. But a few years later, I joined, I'm no longer a member, but for about 15 years, I was a member of Rotary International. And I was the founding secretary of their microfinance group, which is a worldwide group now. They've grown. And I spent several years in the field looking at microfinance, where very small loans are made to people, mostly women, around the world. They have to pay them back, but for $5 or $10 or $50, a family can sustain itself. And it's the most capability developing, enabling thing you've ever seen. And Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel Prize laureate, created an organization called Grameen Foundation. And I went into the field in Uganda and Kampala for a week, where we went into the field to the farmers way out in the field that had great bandwidth. They didn't have electricity, but they were solving problems with smartphones. And so we had a development team back in Kampala that we were teaching Scrum and Kanban and value stream analysis. And out in the field, we were meeting with these collectives in a circle. And these villagers, they knew what they were doing. They had just as much smarts as we do. We just happened to win the birth lottery of being born in a developed country. But my gosh, they just need a little information, a little help, a little encouragement and support. And they do just amazing things. And that's when it really clicked for me, because capability development and empowerment is what Lean and Agile are all about.
So it sounds like you were using the practices around Kanban and visualization of work that was to develop the apps they were putting on the smartphones?
In this particular case, yes.
Okay.
But I've used, every time I go into a situation, almost every time, we stand up a Kanban board before the end of the day, because you get to the point where everyone kind of knows why they're there, the scope of the problem they're trying to tackle, but then they have different perspectives on the problem. And the Kanban is such a simple way to help get people towards collectively understanding the problem, understanding the priorities, making visible when there are conflicting priorities or lack of clarity in prioritization, and sorting it out. And once they understand where they're going together and why they have this shared purpose, which Daniel Pink, great book, talks so much about, you just need to stand back and enable them to do their work. And Kanban, it's not magic. There are other tools that come into play later, but the icebreaker for me is always Kanban, to help make them a team, help them see the vision and get them pointed in the right direction, their direction.
Yeah. And Marcus, you mentioned volunteers when you were talking about, common problems for NGOs to overcome. Do you find that volunteer base rotates a lot so that you're constantly having to reorganize around the work, or is it typically the same group of volunteers?
Yeah, that is absolutely one of the challenges. Like, who is our team today, right? And who will be around here for a long period of time? So at least in Sweden, we see that being changed a bit back and forth between evenings or even weeks and projects. But I mean, of course, there are people employed as well that hangs around. But I see that, as you're alluding to here, their work will be mostly like organizing how the rest of us will like fit into the work. And I've learned so much about how they do that in order to get everyone on the same bus, so to speak, to understand, like, yeah, this is a good thing to put your energy in, and this is not necessary now, and stuff like that. So that's absolutely something that is a little bit interesting to see, because it's a very different from my day-to-day work, at least, where you at least have the same people around you every day. So that's one of those aspects. But I also, as I said, I also think another aspects come from the fact that it's not paid work for many people working in the NGOs. It's so they are there out of the goodness of their heart, and that could also be like, what happens when the going gets tough? What happens if we really need to dig our heels in and do some great work? some hard work maybe, then that might be a place when people skid out, where if you were employed, you just have to own up to the situation and just do it.
Yeah, I can imagine too. You both talked about goals, right? And these are big goals, they're lofty goals, but there's probably something in there too about that psychology of micro wins, right? And being able to focus and get things done in these small volunteer groups to be able to show that you're making progress towards something that might seem very impossible, right? These goals are, they're lofty, especially for like some of the ones you shared, Steve. So it's like, how do we keep people excited and make them feel like they're making progress towards something that's huge?
Yeah.
Well, Marcus, will you share a little bit about your story of Bungsu?
Yeah. So as I said, I was working, me and my wife, we volunteered to do some work for the Salvation Army in Indonesia. And the Salvation Army is running a pretty big health program in Indonesia. So they are actually running six hospitals and 17 clinics spread out through this vast country. However, there was a hospital in the city where we lived, which was just 200 meters from where we lived. And they had some real problems, because they were not making any money. Just because you're a not-for-profit doesn't mean that you still need to make money to make the thing go around, right? And they were not making any money. They didn't pay their staff enough money. It was below the minimum standard, which is an offense, right? And also we learned that they had a permit to run the hospital that was not renewed. So they were basically not really okay running a hospital. At this point, the roof fell in. So the roof on the second floor fell in. I don't know, can I share a screen here?
I think you can, yeah.
Let me see if you can see this. I'll just share this screen. Can you see this picture?
Yep.
So that's what we had on the second floor of the hospital. So notice the sky, right? There's no roof. It just basically collapsed. And these pictures are actually me on the second floor when I went up there and just showed them how it looked. And on the first floor, we saw things just dripping down into the pharmacy, into the fuse box, and hey, even Jesus had mold on him. So things were very bleak looking with all the other problems as well. And when I came down from the second floor, I met the management team of the hospital, and they were shocked. So I was the first one that dared to go up there, I presume. And when I came down, they just looked at me and they just said, in typical Indonesian fashion, they just said, "Mr. Marcus, what should we do?" And I probably scared the life out of them, because I said, I don't know anything about running a hospital. So you need to help me. I do know, however, how to get stuff done. So I did exactly what Steve said, right? I started off with like, okay, so what do you think is the most important thing to do right now? And we actually created a Kanban board just about directly in the hall there. And from that point on, we started to work with small tasks of improvements every day that we could get around to. But I think the main thing that we did that really caught their attention was that we realized that although the roof had fallen in, right, it was a big problem. We also were running out of money. So if we couldn't get people to come to the hospital, we would be out of business in just a couple of weeks, actually. Someone calculated, I think we were like 6 weeks out of bankruptcy when we started to make this change. I'm happy that I didn't know that when I started, because then I wouldn't have dared touched anything. So what we did was that this was a Christian workplace, so they actually had a morning prayer, we sometimes call the daily stand-up a morning prayer, but this was a proper morning prayer. So we created a huge diagram and we put it in front of the staff every morning, where we showed like, this is how many people we need in order to maintain the hospital each day. And this is how many people that actually came to the hospital. And by showing them that, they could very quickly realize that we all need to chip in here in order to make our service good enough for people to come here, and also to improve the quality of our service overall, which in the first couple of weeks just were about cleaning up the second floor and put a roof on. So with that diagram, with a super clear goal and a Kanban board where we, as the management team, showed what we were doing in order to get our work done each and every day, we very quickly got the attention and the interest of the entire hospital to rally behind that goal. And to be a little bit humble also, I need to say that a more clear burning platform has never been in place. So this, I mean, everyone, I needed to explain it to them, but everyone actually understood pretty quickly. If we don't fix this, this is over. We are all out of a job. So that was super helpful. And we sometimes talk about the sense of urgency, right? It was there. I can tell you, it was there. People knew that this could very easily end in disaster. But from that point, we started to work with small things that was improved just about every day. Some days it was just fixing a door. Other days it was cleaning up a room or deciding on how we're going to renovate the second floor and things like that. And little by little, we worked our way forward there. So that's how we started off using the principles of Kanban, I would say, because it was not like I didn't come there to implement Kanban. I came there to do some good work, and the thing that I know how to make stuff happen is to make it visual, work with small batch sizes, and then focus on getting stuff done. And there you have the principles of Kanban. So I never told them that we were doing Kanban. They didn't care. I didn't care. I just wanted to get stuff done. And so that's how we got started with that. And another secret which ties back to what we talked about before is that I couldn't tell them what to do because I still don't know anything about running a hospital. I know a little bit more, but I wouldn't trust myself being in charge of a hospital. So I had to give them control of what we should do. And that made me just the coach and just the person that helped them to actually focus on getting stuff done and making things clear. And when I didn't understand it, I could tell them, like, I don't think anyone else would understand this either. So you need to make it clearer. Rather than them being down and gritty with all the problems that you have in running a hospital, we could then make a communication much clearer like that.
Yeah. You said something there, Marcus, about batch size, and I'd love to hear from either of you about where batch size fits in from a nonprofit piece, right? When we think batch size from a technology perspective, it's pretty cut and dry, right? It's like make the code scope of what we're trying to change smaller and still valuable so that we can get something out and get feedback. How does batch size and work item size factor in when we're talking about nonprofit work?
Mind if I take a stab at that? Sure. Keep in mind that I come from a manufacturing background. That's where I got my start. That's where Lean got its start. And so many people associate Kanban with software development, which is where it's evolved to and doing great. But it started in manufacturing. So if you look at it through a manufacturing lot size question, you don't make cornflakes one at a time. You make them in vats. You don't build bridges 5 at a time. You build 1 at a time. So lot size, there is no optimal lot size without understanding the constraints and the nature of the work that's being done and all of that. So in intellectual work or running an office where you're not moving physical things around, you're constrained by other things like overburden, the phone's always ringing, whatever, the roof is falling in, you have to understand the constraints. But the lot size, in my mind, it basically comes down to what is a unit of work that can, in the period of time you need, that you have every day, you can get the most important things done and get them done to a point where they make things a little better. And I know I'm still being ambiguous. The whole notion of Kanban is ambiguous until you put your hands on sticky notes with somebody on a board and a group of people. And after the first chaotic 10 or 15 minutes, hopefully with a good coach to help you sort it out, it starts to come clear what's happening. And at that moment, you understand the unit of work that needs to be done, the priorities, colors, if you're using colors, how people collaborate. And I like to think at that point, the role of the coach or someone who's done Kanban before is to start probing and saying, isn't that a little too much to tackle in a day? Don't you need to break that up, chunk it out into smaller pieces and prove that it's going to work in the first place? You know, Marcus, the other day when we spoke, you pointed out the Lean Startup, a great book, where
Yep.
Eric makes it a very important point. You need to prove the value proposition, that what you want to do is actually going to have the desired effect before you solve the growth proposition. I'm sorry, value hypothesis and growth hypothesis. So many people go right to scaling a solution and take 2 weeks to do it, only to find out that if they tried an MVP to probe and say, will this even work in a day, they would have said, no, that's not going to work. You pivot and you try something else. So break it down into little proof points, whatever those are, and learn and be able to pivot your way towards faster solutions that stick.
Yeah. Yeah. You're preaching to the choir, my friend, but I'm with you. And to me, Colleen, I think that batch size and whip limit is a tool in itself, right? So someone, I think maybe it was David Anderson that used the analogy of this is like the pain dial. How much pain do you want to inflict? And as Steve said, we could most definitely try to manufacturing cornflakes one at a time, but it would be extremely painful and any problem would stop the flow totally. So that's too painful. You don't want that size of, so you need to like adjust the level of batch size continuously with the focus on the value that we're creating. And I think that is actually where Lean sits so well in NGOs, because the value that we're creating is always like in the front and center of everything. We don't need, we know why we're here, and we're pretty often very hands-on, right? So we could actually very easily see the value that we are creating. What we did around this with in the hospital was that I actually challenged the team to always, when we did an improvement, so it was basically just improvements of processes and tools that we had in the hospital, and I always said, like, how can we know tomorrow if this is improving or not? And very often they said, you can't, because now we're going to do a marketing campaign here, and you can't know that tomorrow. So then I could, using the, like, I want the lowest possible whip, and using that constraint in my reasoning, I can then say, like, okay, so if you got 2 weeks, would we see a difference then? Yeah, of course. Would you see it in 1 week? Maybe. Okay, let's try it in 1 week. So that's the kind of reasoning, and that's not because we decided that we're going to have the lowest whip limit. It was just that I had the constraint of thinking in small batch sizes with me, and that constraint led me to that reasoning. And I think taking on constraints like that is actually very useful. I'm working right now in this school. We're doing a lot of mob programming. Have you heard about mob programming?
Yeah.
So basically, if you haven't heard about mob programming, it's basically 4 or 5 people, one screen, one keyboard. So you have a whip limit of 1. You're only doing one thing. And obviously, that means a lot of constraints in how we get to work, right? We don't type as much. There's not more typing. However, with that constraint in place, you can also solve problems much faster. So it's a balance, and that's what for me, that's what whip limits is for. Like, how much power, how much pain, if you want to inflict in order to get this improvement in place. And it can most definitely be too low. I think that's something that we rarely talk about, but I think that it's often that you run into problems when you set your whip limit too low and you get too much of the improvement work in your lap at once, right? Then it's probably good to back it up a little bit.
And you said something interesting about what you were visualizing too in the hospital, that you were looking at the capacity on a daily basis, right? Like it might change depending on how many people showed up. You might need, you might need to adjust that whip on a daily basis based on how many volunteers you have walk in the door. And so I think that was an interesting differentiation, I guess, that might not be something that's consistent day to day based on how much capacity you've got available to go do that work.
Yeah, no, I can most definitely see that. We had a pretty consistent level for that, but I mean, imagine ER work, or you're doing work out in the field, then you wouldn't know that, and
Yeah.
that's another constraint that we need to keep in mind when we're setting up how we're going to do the work and to adjust to. So yeah, absolutely.
So I'd love to switch gears a little bit and talk about another common problem you both brought up, which was funding, right? And so funding can, when we think about the money available for NGOs, that translates into resources, but also there's another side of this of how they get funded, right? Whether it's grants, donations, those things. What have you seen about working in a Kanban fashion that could help an NGO start to track better metrics, show progress towards goals? What kind of things does it help them do when they're going to try to get money or resources? And either one of you can answer that.
Steve and I actually talked the other day, and for me, I saw I see a very good connection between how Lean was invented or actually took off in Japan with the day-to-day life of a typical NGO, meaning that you have very limited resources, very little money, and you need to make do with whatever you have, and with a strong focus on the value that we're creating. That's where Lean was invented for Toyota, right? They just said we don't have money, we don't have anything to build with. So I think that's a very important thing, and for me, that's the whole reason it works, is that we put a lot of our efforts into, with the smallest smallest input possible, create the greatest value. And it starts with the value that we create for the end customer, for the receiver of the good that we're trying to do. So to me, it sits really nicely together, but you need to dare to challenge what is the value that we're creating. Why are we here? So I don't know if you've seen this a similar thing.
Completely. And I'm going to riff off what you just said. These days, everyone is focusing on, where do we make a charitable contribution, whether you're Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, or someone just putting a few dollars in at Christmas time and giving them as gifts to family. It does the whole continuum. And the industry has responded over the years with some very rigorous metrics and oversight, trying to pin down nonprofits. And a few very high-flying nonprofits in the last few years have gotten caught by misusing funds or doing this or that. I'm not going to name them. I'm sure we all know who they are. But the focus is on getting the most bang for their buck. And what you see again and again is, how much of my dollar goes to outcomes, not to administration, not to answering the telephone. Now, you have to answer the telephone, you have to do these things, but how do you reduce the amount of non-value adding activity to increase the amount of value adding activity? And that is the Lean equation, right back to, like you said, Toyota. That's how post World War II Japan, Toyota was barely staying afloat, and 50 years later, they're the biggest automaker in the world, competing against the biggest automakers when they couldn't even get natural resources into their country after the war. And they did it by focusing on minimizing doing those things that were not adding value, and focusing on what are the most important things that the customer wants. And in the commercial world, the customer is willing to pay for. Well, in the NGO world, the nonprofit world, is how does it serve the mission? How does it serve humanity? And those outcomes are a little tougher to measure, but you still have to measure them. So the point here is that, and I want to talk to the NGOs for a minute, because, batch size and WIP limit, I can go with you with the best of them and the Kanban geeks, but I want to talk to the people who don't even have electricity all day. They may not even be able to get sticky notes, but maybe they can have a pair of scissors and cut out some piece of paper and some Scotch tape and a pen and put this thing up on a wall and start to sort things out. So I'm talking low tech, no tech for a minute, because that's the beauty of Kanban. You can do it very elaborately, and it scales to very large projects and organizations, or you can do it on anybody's wall at any time. And the focus is to get a group of people together to agree, first of all, to your point, Marcus, what are we doing here? Well, we need a roof. Well, why do we need a roof? Because we need to run a hospital. Well, what do we need to do to run a hospital? Well, we need patients. You know, oh, we thought the problem was the roof. Well, we could fix the roof and still be out of business in 2 weeks. So what are the strategic priorities? What are the interdependencies? What are the things we need to just put a bandage on for now, or a tourniquet, and move forward on these other things? And I'm going to plug your book, Marcus, because for anyone out there listening, go to Amazon, click Look Inside, read the first 2 chapters of the book, which are free. And if you don't go buy this book after reading those first 2 chapters, I'm just going to say, because this is not a book. This is not a book about Kanban. This is a masterfully told story about how you waded into a situation, and you were not the expert in any of this, but you helped through this visual communication, problem solving, prioritization mechanism, help get these disparate teams of doctors and administrators and people who were pounding in nails working together towards a collective goal with creating the least amount of waste, because everybody knew they couldn't afford a second's worth of waste. And they did it themselves because the needs were visible, the problems were visible, the progress was visible, how much work they had to do in a day, which we call WIP, was visible, and they were able to sort it out themselves. And the beauty of Kanban, in my mind, whether it's electronic or whether it's sticky notes on a big board, goes back to an old phrase that started, I think, in the 70s. It says, making the invisible visible. You can get a group of motivated team together, help make the invisible visible, those things that are under the radar, that are tugging at them, the things they think they have to do, but they don't add value, and how they say, I shouldn't do this, I should do that, and do that safely and collectively. And when you empower a team to start thinking collectively and guide their own work and achieve their outcomes, then you've got something. And that's what Kanban can do in literally any situation in any work environment.
I feel like that's the mic drop.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that plug. Can I just add on? I have 2 comments. The first one is that you were absolutely right. Sticky notes are expensive in Indonesia. We didn't use them. We used on a whiteboard, and then I actually erased and moved it into the next column by writing. So the simplest possible thing that could work. We even used stones to show whips in some places where we did work on like hands-on. So anything that just makes the invisible visible, so that you get an information radiator. Another thing, Colleen, when we talked, I just thought back to your question there, where we could see this, and it was super clear for us when we first ran into the problem that we need more patients to come in here, or this is over. However, after about 9 months, we actually hit that goal. So we were now making money every day. And this was a super interesting time in the history of this project, because then I turned to the director, a very young doctor, and I just asked her, like, Dr. Lillian, what are you going to do with all the money? And she was like, what are you talking? They didn't have any money for years. Like, it was a downhill slope that we saw the end of. So I just said, like, well, the goal of the hospital cannot be to make money, right? Because if that's the case, I'm going to stand outside the door and just whack the patient on the head when they come out, and then they have to go back in again. So we just, no, that's true. That's not the goal. But now we had a system in place where we could talk about, so what is the goal then? And we started to measure 4 different aspects. Like, so we had obviously a financial goal, a quality goal, and also a staff goal. Like, do the staff actually enjoy being here? And believe it or not, we even, since this was a Salvation Army hospital, we even started to track goals when it came to pastoral quality. So do we actually do the pastoral work that the Salvation Army had put this in hospital in place to do? And once we ended up there, we actually had a very good, again, riffing of lean startup world, we could now see that if these are our goals and we want to expand in all these areas at once, what is the next small little experiment we can do in order to see if that happens?
Mm.
So we ended up, that's the twice in the title, right? That was
Yeah.
the second time where we actually used the principles of Kanban to guide us towards a way to actually find better ways of working that we didn't even think of before we started. And the real kicker of this was that when I got back home into Sweden, I got a message from my from the hospital's people that I know there, and they just said, like, we have now opened a new department that we didn't have before, because we saw that that would actually make an increase in these two areas at the same time. And to me, that I was so happy when I heard that, because I wasn't even there. They were just doing it by themselves, because that's how they do it. So yeah, that was a very proud moment in my coaching career, when they were running the hospital by themselves, without me even being there. But I think, to your point there, Colleen, it was a very long parenthesis there. But to your point, Kanban can also start to challenge and make clearer the real goal we are here. As Steven said,
Yeah.
like administration, absolutely, and project administration, reporting back to the donors, very, very important, but that's not why we're here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we only did that, that would not be good enough.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to open it up for our audience members to start posting some questions in chat. And while we're giving them a chance to ask some questions of you both, I would love to hear, how can people start to get involved, right? I'm sure we have an audience of hopefully people in the NGO world and Lean Kanban practitioners out there. So where could people, if you're interested in contributing and working with NGOs the way you both have, where would you recommend people go look or get started?
Well, I would read anything that Steven has posted on his website about NGOs and Kanban, where it goes together. Because to be honest, that was the first time I heard that someone has actually seen this as a thing.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I think it's spot on. And I mean, I've used it myself, so I know that it works. So before you tell more about that, Steven, I just want to say,
Yeah.
where I came from, I basically just did what I knew worked. So if you're a software developer, if you're an agile coach, if you're a lean practitioner, you have a lot of skills to make work flow better. Put it in good use. Go down to your local food dispenser thing and see where you can probably help them in that way, if you don't want to just dish out mashed potatoes, right?
Yeah.
But Steven, there's so much more to read on Lean for NGO website and to learn.
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Thank you. First of all, none of the books I've published have to do with NGOs. So you would find technology and Kanban and Lean and Flow and Agile and all of those. But about 12 years ago, I stood up Lean for NGO. First of all, it's not a nonprofit. It's not a 501c. It's always been self-funded. And it has been pretty modest, but it has kept growing and growing for years. It's basically a website where anytime I or someone, a member, would send me content, an article, a document, anything that would be a lesson learned, I would post them on the website catalog. And I also stood up a LinkedIn group. And that has grown to several thousand members, still adding members, several every week. An occasional post from a member, but mostly what I have done is curate the content and try to keep the advertisers away. Don't allow any advertising in that group. And when something happens, like there was a lot of good content out of the Lean world about pandemic response and accelerating getting the medicine out into the hands of the people as quickly as possible. Some great stories in Africa, different projects in different countries, Brazil, Bulgaria, you name it, case studies, just a lot of good dialogue. But what's been most fruitful for me is the connections, connecting this person over here and that person over there, who then go off and do something and share. And I'm hoping that more of that happens. I have a little more time on my hands now. Let's say I'm at the sunset of my career where I have more time to do these sort of things. And I just made the commitment to Colleen when she invited me. It's been my intention in the next year to stand up a series of 10-minute, I'm calling them YouTube Chalk Talk videos, 10-minute videos, to tackle some of these bigger questions about what is Lean, what is Agile, what are these tools, what's Kanban, what's value stream analysis, what are problem solving techniques, but put them into little bite-sized 10-minute snippets that anyone anywhere can consume and understand and hopefully put to work. And so my first one, I promise, in the next 30 days, I'll have it out on Kanban, and you just go to leanforNGO.org, LEAN for NGO.org, and you'll find a link to it. This is my MVP, so it's not going to be perfect. It'll be quick, and every subsequent one I'll do will be pulled based upon questions or comments or feedback I get from the people who are out there looking at them. So I'm hoping this turns into something. And but back to the basic question, there's a lot of older content on Lean for NGO, great case studies, no matter what it is you do, if you're an NGO, to get you started.
Great. Yeah, and I see a couple questions here. I see that we've responded to with the website and the LinkedIn group. So those links are posted here, and we'll make sure they're posted in the show notes on YouTube when we post our recording, along with the link to Marcus's book. I see another question here. Is there training available for NGOs who want to use Kanban, and what would you recommend?
To my knowledge, there's no specific training designed for that. And as I said, I'm coming from a very one case that I tried out, but I learned so much from doing that. So I would go and read any basic things on how to get this Kanban stuff up and work, and then just start doing it and learn by doing, because it's not hard. You can get it up on basically no technology at all in 10 minutes. What is hard is to do something about the things that you see. So when I'm in a bad mood, I sometimes call Lean a problem finder, because that's basically what it is. It will show you the problem. It will not solve the problem for you. It will show you the problem. If you don't solve it, you will still have the problem. So seeing the problem and try to, with the constraints that Kanban give you, with WIP limits and all of those things, try to do something about it. So for example, let's take the example of WIP limits. So say that you're allowing yourself to work with 5 items. If you now run into problems with one, that's your push to actually solve that problem and get it done, rather than to start something new, because then you will go over the WIP limit. That's what the WIP limit is for. The WIP limit is made up by you. You can break it if you want to, but then you will not get the power and usage out of a Kanban system. It's just a problem finder, or an unrealized improvement finder. Maybe that's the more positive spin of it.
Yes. But it makes it visible. If you're not getting your work done, it's visible. And then you ask why. Why isn't it getting done? Well, maybe my WIP limits, or maybe this, or maybe that. My take at the question, Colleen, is there training out there for NGOs? Whoever in the world just posted that question. The answer, sadly, is no, not free. That's the intent of my 10-minute video, is to at least get people a start. But Kanban, again, the beauty of Kanban is it's simple. But there's a difference between simple and easy. Take a golf swing. Everything Tiger Woods does is simple. Everything Roger Federer does with a tennis racket is simple. Is that easy? No. It's that practicing, getting the basics of doing this, doing it yourself, doing it at home, organizing your own priority list, and then maybe taking it to work, or maybe you learn it at work and then you take it home. And doing it at the level that works for you, because Kanban can scale to an entire organization. Tons of books out there, lots of training organizations. Both of you, Colleen and Marcus, do this for a living to an extent. And if an organization has the muscle and the budget, the wherewithal to do that, you're the kind of people they should hire. The challenge is the people doing the work in the field Indonesia, Uganda, Brazil, you name it. They don't have those resources. And, there may be someday someone doing that, virtually that can handle that sort of thing, but it's really incumbent on the larger NGOs to put together coaching teams that if they say, we want to deploy Kanban across the whole organization, that we see this as a tool to help everyone get focused and prioritized and aligned and visually communicating, visually managing. It's best if that starts from the top down, and then the organization pushes it down inside and uses that learning process internally. I've seen that happen a number of times. Do I see it happen a lot? No. That's what I hope to get going with Lean for NGO, and I've seen happen a few times. But the bottom line is start somewhere. Get the board, draw your 5 columns. I'm not even going to tell you what those 5 columns are. Grab your sticky notes, whatever, and start practicing, playing with it. And if it's working for you, great. If it's not, ask why, and then try again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just realized that I actually did some training for when I worked in Indonesia for my colleagues there. So I posted that now. I hope
Excellent.
that Maria maybe can share it later on, because that's absolutely a very, very short introduction to Kanban. But to be honest, as you hear me and Stephen talking about all over and over here, getting started is not the problem.
Yeah.
Acting on what you learn, that is the problem. And like daring to ask, why did this happen? And daring to do something about it together. That's like the real value that you will get out of this.
Yeah. Yeah. And you both talked a lot about respect for people at the beginning. And I want to circle back and maybe close out with your thoughts on that part of this. I heard Steve, you use the term sustainable pace for the teams of how they're working. We've talked about adapting the amount of work to the people that show up to do the work. But where did you see Kanban really shine in the projects that you worked on, where respect for people came up as a major part of how it helped them?
On 2 levels. On one level, the ability of a team, a cross-functional team, people with different skills working on different parts of the problem, like the story of the blind men and the elephant. They all grab a piece of the elephant and they say, well, the elephant's a tree trunk. No, it's a snake. That's natural in any kind of work. And a tool like Kanban to help you visualize these things so the team can gain agreement on what the goal is, their varying perspectives of it, if there are any disagreements and priorities, and then use that going forward. Because there's something I came up with. I guess I coined the term 10 years ago. Haven't gotten any royalties for it yet, but it was called dark demand, like dark matter. The scientists say there's dark matter in the universe. It's most of it. When you talk to people about the things they do each day, it's mostly dark demand. Well, I do this on Tuesdays and I have to go to this meeting on Thursdays. Well, why do you do it? Because I have to. Is that on your Kanban board? No. Well, it's dark demand then, right? It's dark work. It's consuming time, it's consuming cycles and energy, and it's not on your Kanban board. And the more dark work you put on your Kanban board, beside the work you need to get done, suddenly you're going to see what's crowding out the work you need to get done. And if you communicate that to a small team, they do the head slap moment and they go, you come back a week later and it's like, okay, we got this. We stopped doing this. We told the boss, that's stupid. We're not doing this anymore. And they're in charge now. They own their work. They own their outcomes. The other thing, though, is when there's a team that's being guided from the top down, politics comes into play where people are being told what to do. And in an environment where people are continue to be told what to do, command and control, Kanban has a chance of working, like you said, Marcus, if they dare to say, we shouldn't do it this way, if we dare to say, we can't do that. But if there isn't an openness to learn and trust, especially from the top down, and understand that the team has what it takes, they're closest to the work and to the customer, and they have the skills. Our job as managers and leaders is to enable them, to give them what they need, to support them and help them solve the problems they can't overcome, and then back away and just support. And in some cultures, particularly bureaucratic and pathological cultures, that doesn't happen so easily. But in a truly generative culture, talking about the Western model now, in a truly generative culture where everybody realizes this is all about development, learning, and growth to move the whole organization forward, it works. And so that's what it's really, you want to talk people, it's creating that where we all learn that we understand we all have to be servant leaders. And that's the way we not only solve today's problem, but build an organization that sustains itself long after I'm gone.
Yeah. I just want to tag on. There's a great book that I recommend everyone to read called Turn the Ship Around by David Marquet. If you haven't read it, it's amazing. You should read it. And it talks very much about what Stephen talked there about. Do we have time? I have a story where we basically we were very close of breaking a person in the hospital. So the general manager of taking care of everything that was not medical stuff and finance, she was overworked, and we basically made her world horrible because we changed priorities just about every day. So she had a lot to do and never got anything done. So the solution to this problem was exactly what Stephen said. And I realized that because we started to talk about totally wrong things with the management team. We talked about details that we were not interested in. So what I said was, I want you, and I pointed to her, Ibo Elshi was her name. I want you to be in charge of all of these things. And you come to us if you have any problems. And other than that, you report back to us on Fridays. We did this on a Monday. And then on this Friday, she was supposed to report back, but there's 35 public holidays in Indonesia, a good place to work. So when it took 2 weeks, and you know what happened? Usually she did around 3 things per week. So I was hoping for 6. Her team had accomplished 6 things. I was hoping for maybe 10. That would be an improvement. You know what? They finished 47 items.
Wow.
So what did we do? What was the amazing thing that I did? The thing was, I just backed off and I told her that you are now in charge. You control how much work you're going to put out into your teams so that not everyone comes there and pull each one, adding on dark work, as you said, dark matter work, but rather they could now focus on what they had to do. And the most amazing thing about this was around 2 weeks later, she was overworked to the point where she was crying before we made this change. And we have now spent 4 weeks in a new system. And at this point, she came up to me and she pointed to my shirt that I had on. And she said, you know, Marcus, your sleeve has come untied. And I said, oh, sorry. And I'm a Swedish man. So I said, I'm gonna fix that later. I'm going to stitch it up later. And she just looked in my eyes and she said, you know what? I used to be a sewing lady here at the hospital, so I can help you with that. And I said, but Ibuechi, you're the general manager of the hospital. You don't have time for that. I do, she said. And she doesn't speak very good English, and the Indonesian was on the level of a 4-year-old. So she took me to her tiny, tiny office, which was located under a stair. And it was 27 degrees Celsius hot. So I took off my shirt. She wrapped me in a blanket, even though I was sweating. And we just sat there while she was stitching my shirt together. It's still up there, one of those. And and that, for me, that was her way of saying thank you. But again, the thing I did was just to leave her to control the flow of the work within her organization part. So stepping back is so important. But doing that in a fashion so that she understands, that she knows, in this case, what the goal is. So that was one of the more amazing stories that I've experienced, which, to be quite honest, it was maybe 2 or 3 sentences that actually created this change for her.
Yeah, and you gave her the time back, right? She had time to pull you into the office and stitch that shirt up. She had slack.
Indeed. I can't stitch my own shirt up. I want to say that. Okay, so
We are at the top of the hour, and I just want to thank you both so much for joining us on the episode today. I think this was an incredible conversation, and we would love to hear from any of the audience members around future topics you'd like to see on Kanban for Everyone, or even future conversations with Steve and Marcus. I feel like we could spend a whole nother hour on this topic in particular.
I would love to.
We'll post, like I said, we'll post all these links in our show notes on YouTube, but please check out Marcus's book, Salvation, and check out leanforNGO.org if you're interested in learning more about different case studies, stories, and check out that link for the LinkedIn community if you're interested in trying to build up connections and finding places where you can connect either with practitioners or nonprofits looking for some help. So Marcus, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate all your insights and storytelling. We'd love to have you back.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Colleen and Steve, for a nice conversation, and very nice to be here, and for the invite. Thanks a lot.
Likewise. Thank you much.
Thanks, everyone.